back to the Schiller and Hamilton Podcast. We're here yet again today, and today we have the illustrious Joel Hamilton back in the hot seat instead of the interviewer seat. And I think today we're going to talk about some truck accidents, correct?
Yeah, I think so. It's
Awesome.
nice to be the interviewee for the change.
Yeah, it's a little change of pace for
Yeah.
you. And I've actually have not been interviewed in a while. So
By the way, thank you for the coffee.
no
It's
problem
delicious.
at all. 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, you need a little extra
That's
boost
right.
to get through the rest of the day.
Mhm.
All right, so let's talk about trucking accidents.
Okay.
Meaning, when someone is involved in an accident with a semi-truck or tractor-trailer truck, whatever you want to call it. Let's just start right off the bat. We've talked about several times about the differences or the nuances of a case as to why you might want to have a lawyer. So let's talk about these trucking accidents in specific. What are some specific things about trucking accidents that you would spur you to want to have legal representation?
Well, trucking cases are totally different from your regular run-of-the-mill just car wreck. So as soon as you have a tractor trailer involved or a large truck, it opens up a whole new layer of regulations that just don't exist for a run-of-the-mill traffic accident. So in addition to your rules of the road, your state laws that would apply in a regular traffic accident, you all of a sudden also have an entire world of federal regulations on top of that.
Okay, so like an airplane or like buses, they're a regulated industry.
Exactly.
Okay.
Highly regulated. So anyway, if you're a layperson and you're struck by a tractor trailer, there's all of a sudden a whole world of new regulations that are going to be foreign to you, as well as a whole world of possible relevant evidence that needs to be obtained. And there's only one good way to obtain that, and that's through the legal process.
Okay. Specifically, what are some of those rules and regulations that will come forward during, the legal process in a trucking case?
So the rules that we're referring to are the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. And the FMCSRs basically apply to motor carriers, which includes basically the truck itself. So they cover the truck, the driver, and the company. And all those rules impose a certain set of duties and obligations upon the company, the driver, and whoever is maintaining the truck to perform their duties according to a certain standard. And among those standards, there's very specific rules down to, the cables that connect the trailer to the back of the truck. If you're ever going down the highway and you see the red and the blue cables kind of bouncing between the truck and the trailer, those have to be new and very clearly distinguished between the red and the blue, for instance. So just about everything is covered under those rules.
So just day-to-day, any truck you see on the road, they're going to be following all these rules and regulations on their day-to-day travels.
Well, that's the idea.
Yeah.
They're supposed to. And it really comes down to, like, for the driver, it's basically like, the who, what, where, and why of transport. So, for the driver, they're required to do a pre-trip inspection. They're required to maintain their logs if they're engaged in interstate commerce or outside of a certain radius of the home terminal. So they're not allowed to spend more than a certain number of hours in the cab driving versus time off versus in the sleeper berth. And all that is based on, how far they're traveling and what, if they're staying overnight and that sort of thing. And so, and it's cumulative too over the week. So again, it's important to get like all the evidence that you can and get those logbooks back, at least for a week or two, so you can piece together what that driver's history was over the last few weeks. As far as the truck goes, the truck has to be maintained. So whoever is in charge of the truck has to perform all of the maintenance to keep it up to, proper status so that it can actually be safe on the road. The motor carrier themselves, the company, they're required to have, training, certain hiring practices, regular drug testing of its drivers. They can't knowingly put the driver in a situation or even negligently put the driver in a situation where the driver has to exceed their hours in order to meet a goal for a delivery. There's lots of ways that a motor carrier has to look out for or be aware of those rules. And any transportation company like Worth Its Salt spends a lot of time and effort and money to be aware and to comply with those rules.
Certainly. You can sit here and imagine, assuming, if I was a layperson or a layperson could, sit here and imagine that these FMCSR, that's a new.
We'll just call them the rules. How about
the
that
rules.
one?
Let's just call them the rules. These rules obviously govern everything about the trucking industry, but how does that apply specifically or generally, I guess, when you're dealing with a case where someone was in an accident with a tractor-trailer truck?
So the reason why they're applicable is because you want to look for violations of those rules that may have contributed to the wreck, or may have been a cause. For instance, we've had cases where a driver tested positive for illicit drugs, the driver of the truck after the wreck. So then it obviously became very relevant as to whether the company was testing that person. So that's a way. Driver fatigue is a big cause of several of these wrecks. So making sure that the logbooks are correct, making sure that there are logbooks, that we don't have drivers that are exceeding their hours. And believe it or not, sometimes those records are falsified. So then once you get the records, you have to go through and piece together the time and the distance of the trips over the last week and see if they could have completed those trips in the certain number of hours that they're actually showing. So yeah, there's lots of ways that a violation can contribute to a wreck. Another classic example is like failure to properly maintain the vehicle. So if the brakes aren't replaced after a certain number of miles, if the driver isn't doing a pre-trip inspection and they didn't see a bubble on the side of a tire that was there, or if lights are out or reflectors or signals, there's a laundry list of things that need to be checked in that pre-trip inspection. And any one of those things could possibly contribute or cause some type of dangerous situation that can lead to a wreck.
Oh, so basically what you're saying here, and I don't want to get too much into the specifics of a legal case, but they're just adding an entire another level of a duty of care.
Yeah.
The normal driver on the road, we have your duty of care to drive, on the rules of the road, follow ordinances and rules and speed limits and things like that. But this is adding in a complete other level of a standard of care that could be breached.
It's a very specific and heightened standard of care that basically is a reaction to the possible harms and losses that can occur due to a tractor-trailer accident. These very large, very heavy vehicles. There's really no such thing as a small tractor-trailer wreck. Generally, if something happens involving a large commercial vehicle, the consequences are going to be significant. And the federal government has decided that those potential risks are worthy of regulation at the federal level, which is why those rules exist.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what it governs, or how it governs, these drivers and these trucking companies and shipping companies and things like that.
So it also, it governs literally every part of the day-to-day operations of the trucking company. From how they recruit, how they train drivers, how the drivers actually are onboarded. They have to maintain a driver file that includes all of their drug tests. Those drivers have to be dispatched in a certain manner according to, the time and distance of the trip and whether or not that trip could potentially end up resulting in an hours violation. When the driver arrives to pick up a load, they're required to do a pre-trip to secure the load, do a pre-trip inspection. Well, let me tell you what's somewhat complicated about these things is just the layers of legal entities that often exist when we're talking about trucking cases. And that's really where some of the complexity comes in, because in addition to, the rules that we're talking about, we're also talking about how those rules apply to multiple entities. Very rarely do you have a situation where you have a company driver driving a company truck, pulling a company trailer, and they're all working for the company, which is also the motor carrier of record. The more regular scenario is you have the motor carrier, or you actually have the company that is employing an owner-operator who owns his own truck, that's driving a trailer that's owned by some leasing company that maybe even the trucking company owns or owns a part of that leasing company. And so now all of a sudden you have multiple layers of legal entities that you're going to have to dig into and find out, about all of their hiring practices, whether each of those were being cognizant of the rules, and to what degree there's overlap between all those things. Because if you have one company that's trying to create some legal separation between its different components to kind of isolate legal liability, they have to also recognize those distinctions in how they do business and make sure all of the transactions that occur between each of their own parts are done at an arm's length. And if they're failing to do that, then as lawyers, we have a better argument to pierce the corporate veils that may isolate each of those entities. So, you have not just the rules, but typically multiple layers of legal entities that you now have to try to sift your way through and send rep letters to and potentially file lawsuits against and so forth. So in other words, for a claimant, someone that's a victim of a wreck like this, one of the biggest questions is like, where do you even start? And without proper legal representation, it's nearly impossible to dig into each of those things and figure out what it is that you need to get.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I mean, like you were just saying, we've talked about the rules, and then it's not just a driver and a car. You have multiple legal entities. You have shady practices possibly going around. You have all of these layers that are building on top of your standard run-of-the-mill collision. Also, I'm sure most people would know that, truck drivers have to have a commercial driver's license. Correct. And I'm sure that carries a whole load of regulations and duties as well. So talk about that a little bit.
So not just anyone can jump behind the wheel of a commercial vehicle and operate that commercial vehicle. And all these things are legally defined. So, a commercial vehicle is a vehicle that's engaged in interstate commerce that weighs over 10,000 pounds, or involved in intrastate commerce that basically weighs over 26,000. I think it's 26,001 pounds. But basically, so if you have a truck that weighs over 26,000 pounds, it's definitely going to qualify as a commercial vehicle. If it's over 10,000 pounds and it's crossing state lines and engaged in commerce, then it's also a commercial vehicle. So you can't just jump behind the wheel of one of these vehicles and drive it without being properly trained. And so there are, time and hour requirements, and imagine you remember your driving test when you were 15 or whatever. Imagine that like cranked up to 11 basically. The driver has schooling and hours requirements. Then they have to maintain that CDL. They're supposed to maintain basically a perfect driving record in order to maintain that CDL. And if the government doesn't require it, their liability carrier basically requires it, because they don't want to insure anybody that's going to be a amplified risk for them or their company.
Wow. All right. So we've talked about real briefly. Anyway.
Well, there's a lot of layers of complexity.
There's a lot of complexity.
And I'm trying not to get into the academic part of it, because it has to be relevant. We want to keep it relevant to the listener.
Yeah. But we're not trying to scare people either. But at the same time, it is good to know these things, that there's a lot of moving parts in these cases. There are a lot of different entities to involve with, rules, regulations, government entities to deal with, state, federal. But I think right now we've shown that it is important to have an attorney. But why is it critical to have one right out of the gate?
Well, let me tell you what the attorney has to do right out of the gate. So when you have a potential world of regulations to deal with, and a whole universe of potential violations of those regulations, and you have companies and trucks and people and trailers and all these different components, preservation of evidence out of the gate is the biggest thing with most trucking cases. When you have totaled vehicles, when you have loads that maybe have shifted and have caused wrecks, when you have trailers that aren't properly maintained, you've got to get to the evidence right away and start documenting that evidence. You have to get to the company right away and start getting them to preserve any evidence that they have. And so right out of the gate, you have to send very specific letters to those companies, spoliation letters that list all of the things that you want that company to preserve for evidence. And you're probably going to want to send someone to go look at that truck, which y'all did not too.
Yeah, we did.
Just a couple weeks ago, you got that experience where
Yep.
you had to go document everything. So you need to get to the truck right away, and you need to document any violations that are visible with the truck. And depending on the wreck, you probably also want to get that truck's black box, which is the information on the truck, just like an airplane, that records speed, braking distances, all of those things. But all those bits of evidence could possibly disappear or erode or be in a state of some disrepair into the future. So you want to make sure that you're getting to it right away. So it's important for the lawyer right out of the way to send those letters, and really right out of the gate. I mean, my philosophy is on a trucking case, if there's basically any degree of damages, we just file suit. It's not like a regular, auto wreck case where you may wait till someone's done treating, get the medical records together, send a demand, take the opportunity to try to resolve the case before you file suit. With a trucking case, you just really can't do that. You have to jump in right away and start digging into all of those things, because time is your worst enemy in a trucking case.
And in order to preserve our clients' rights, we have to be able to jump on that immediately.
You have to be able to. And you can imagine, like the case that we had recently, there were reasons to go get pictures of the trailer and see where damage was on the trailer. And if that trailer, if they keep using it and, you don't get pictures of it till 8 months later, well, trailers take a lot of damage backing into loading docks and being in yards and, people bumping them with tow motors or forklifts or whatever the case may be. And over the life of a trailer, they get dinged up quite a bit. And so you could have a year later, there's 10 more dents on that trailer, and you have no idea what was caused from what. So,
or it could be across the country.
It could be gone. Yeah. And then good luck.
Yeah.
So,
because in that case that we were just dealing with a couple of weeks ago, we had an independent operator, and he had a trailer, from a company that he had picked up. So fortunately, it was still together. And we were able to go take pictures. But of course, he could have jumped that trailer off and been on to his next job. And we have no idea. And the trailer was critical to the specific facts of that accident. So, well, that sounds pretty good, Joel. I mean, I know we've kind of touched it briefly, but is there anything else you want to kind of talk about more specifically about the let's just call them the rules, FMCSR?
The big takeaway is, if you're involved in a wreck or any incident involving what you suspect to be a commercial vehicle, and it's basically the smell test. If it's a large truck, then it's probably a commercial vehicle. If you believe that to be the case, then it's definitely not something that you want to handle on your own. And you're going to want to contact attorneys who are accustomed to dealing with tractor-trailer cases and understand the layers of complexity that come with those things. So I would encourage anyone to reach out, especially to Schiller and Hamilton, because we have a lot of experience with that. To discuss those issues if they have been involved or a loved one has been involved in an accident or a wreck involving a tractor trailer.
Well, great. Well, hopefully someone does not need it or need this information.
Right.
Because like we've said, usually most vehicles on the road are going to lose the physics battle.
Exactly.
When you're dealing with a tractor trailer truck, or even like we said, I mean, interstate commerce, we could be talking about a landscape truck, could be over 10,000 pounds, a small box truck, things like that could also be under those rules.
Exactly.
And so we have to make sure you're keeping not just in mind of tractor trailer trucks, but anything that could, like you said, could be commercial. If it's a business, it's probably going to fall under these rules. So, well, I appreciate you sitting down. I know it was a very brief day today, but we're all busy. So
that's right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And if anyone needs any assistance with anything like this, if you've been in an accident like this or have any questions, please feel free to give us a call, and we'd love to help you out. And thanks for watching.